Part E. Part A. Short answer questions 31-36. Document 1. In the years before the Civil War, American women began a campaign for the vote that lasted nearly 75 years. Their battle finally ended in 1920 when the 19th Amendment prohibiting the denial of the right to vote on account of sex was adopted. Initially, suffrage was one of several reforms intended to end the significant legal, political, religious, and cultural discriminations against 19th century women. In 1840s and 1850s, activists targeted injustices ranging from child custody laws that favored fathers to prohibitions against women speaking in public, the denial of equal education, and the existence of a double sex standard. In language and vocabulary familiar to a generation whose parents had lived during the American Revolution and will remember the Declaration of Independence, women at the 1848 Seneca Falls Convention resolved, among other injustices, that all laws which place her in a position inferior to that of man are contrary to the great precept of nature and therefore of no force or authority. A necessary transaction in any democracy between the people and those to whom they delegate authority. Suffrage emerged in the 1860s as both a powerful symbol of equality with men as well as an instrument of reform. Voting became the essential political utility by which women could achieve other improvements in their status. If women could vote, went the argument of this first generation of suffragists, they weren't barriers at the state level that prevented married women from controlling their wages and attending state universities. If women could vote, given their acknowledged position as moral guardians of their homes, they would reform the corrupt practices of American politics. If women could vote, they would end unequal pay. Source: Jean H. Baker, ed. Introduction to Votes for Women. The Struggle for Suffrage Revisited. Oxford University Press. 200,231 according to Jean H. Baker. What was one historical circumstance that led women to seek the right to vote? 1 U.S. Hist. and Gov't. Framework June 23, 24. Document 2. Lucy Hessler learned about the suffragette movement while attending meetings with her mother in Washington, D.C. in the early 1900s. The suffragettes had a big headquarters in downtown Washington, almost across from the Supreme Court building. My mother would take me up there on Saturdays when she volunteered to help out with mailings. I remember helping out by folding letters, licking envelopes, doing all sorts of things. The backbone of the suffrage movement was composed of well-to-do, middle-class women, both Republicans and Democrats. There weren't many working-class women in the movement. Most of them were too busy working to get involved. The suffragettes organized pickets and marches and rallies. It wasn't anything comparable to the violence that the British women were going through in their fight for suffrage. Those women were being arrested and beaten and jailed. Nothing like that happened here, but there was a lot of agitation. Source: Peter Jennings and Todd Brewster. The Century, Doubleday, 1998. Document to be source: Library of Congress adapted. The first picket line, College Day in the Picket Line, February 191,732. Based on these documents, what was one effort made by suffragettes to gain support for 1 U.S. Hist. and Gov't? Framework June 23, 25 over Document 3A. Many men showed interest in the arguments of the anti-suffragists. Source: Library of Congress. CUP 1911. Go on to Document 3B. U.S. Hist. and GovIt. Framework June 23, 26. Document 3B. From the inception of the women's suffrage movement through the ratification of 17th Amendment in 1920, there were women and men who vigorously opposed it. Anti-suffrage individuals and groups obstructed the enfranchisement of women for a multitude of reasons. Early anti-suffragists of the late 1860s and 1876 were primarily concerned that the ballot would disrupt women's domestic and maternal roles and create disharmony in the family. Horace Greeley, one of the most influential anti-suffragists of this era, asserted that the vast majority of women had no interest in voting or in politics. In 1871, conservative domestic authority Catherine Beecher and the wives of General William Sherman and Admiral John Dahlgren delivered to Congress a petition containing 1,000 women's signatures pleading with Congress to desist refrain from enacting a law enfranchising women. Beecher, in her book Women's Suffrage and Women's Profession, proclaimed that if women were given the vote, most would consider it an overwhelming burden that would cause them to shortchange their domestic duties. Other early arguments that persisted throughout the women's suffrage movement included the following: women have all the rights they need already. The ballot will degrade women by causing them to mingle in the dirty, corrupt world of politics. Women don't need to vote because their husbands already vote for what is in women's best interests. And women don't vote when they have the right to do so, an argument based on the occasional low voter turnouts in some municipal elections in states where women already had the vote. Source: Judith E. Harper, Susan B. Anthony, A Biographical Companion. ABC Clio Biographical Companion Adapted 33 based on Documents 3A and 3B. State one reason for opposition to the efforts to gain women's suffrage. 1 score U.S. Hist. and GovIt. Framework June 23, 27 over Document 4. But it should not deceive us. This struggle was waged every bit as seriously as any struggle for equality, and we would do well to consider how women were able to do what men have rarely even tried, changing society in a positive and lasting way without violence and death. Like the now celebrated civil rights movement, women's suffrage records the recent and useful experiences of ordinary citizens forced to fight for their own rights against tremendous odds and social inequities. Here are models of political leadership, of women organizers and administrators, activists and lobbyists. Here are the first women lawyers and doctors and ministers, the first women candidates, the first office holders. Here are stories of achievement, of ingenious strategies and outrageous tactics used to outwit the opponents and make most of limited resources. Here are new definitions and images of women in our national life which give a more accurate picture of the past and which help explain how we American women are treated today. The suffrage movement offers a unique window onto the emergence of women into American political life. This is where many of the intelligent, active, politically oriented men of the time denied the right to participate directly in national politics went. They put their energy into attacking social problems directly and organizing among themselves, locally and nationally, for their own rights. Source: Robert Cooney, taking a new look at the women's suffrage movement in the feminist movement. Nick Triner, ed. Greenhaven Press, 200,234. According to Robert Cooney, what is one impact of the efforts to gain women's suffrage? 1 score U.S. Hist. and Gov't. Framework June 23, 28 Document 5. The lessons of the women's suffrage struggle deeply influenced later American social justice and advocacy. Public interest movements. The lobbying, public relations, and grassroots organizing techniques developed by the suffragists, as well as their use of nonviolent protests and civil disobedience, stood as a model for mid-century African American civil rights campaigners, anti-Vietnam War protest groups, and gay rights activists. No doubt the future will bring more causes, more necessary repairs to American democracy, and more need for passionate civic activism. Source: Elaine Weiss, The Woman's Hour, The Great Fight to Win the Vote. Viking, 201,835. According to Elaine Weiss, what is one impact of the efforts to achieve women's suffrage? 1 score. Document 6. Jeanette Rankin made history 100 years ago this year. 1917, when she took office as the first female member of Congress. I may be the first woman member of Congress, but I won't be the last, the Montana Republican predicted after winning election to the U.S. House of Representatives the year before. Rankin was right. In the century since she began her service as a member of Congress, hundreds of women have followed in her footsteps. But women remained underrepresented in all major political offices and top business leadership positions in the United States. Source: Anna Brown. Despite gains, women remain underrepresented among U.S. political and business leaders. Pew Research Center, March 20, 2017. Adapted. Part Civic Literacy Essay. Question 37. Directions. Write a well-organized essay that includes an introduction, several paragraphs, and a conclusion. Use evidence from at least 4 documents in the body of the essay. Support your response with relevant facts, examples, and details. Include additional outside information, historical context, expansion of democracy. Women's suffragists reflect United States history. Many constitutional and civic issues have been debated by Americans. These debates have resulted in efforts by individuals, groups, and governments to address these issues. These efforts have achieved varying degrees of success. One of the constitutional and civic issues is women's suffrage. Task: using information from the documents and your knowledge of United States history. Read an essay in which you describe the historical circumstances surrounding this constitutional or civic issue. Explain efforts by individuals, groups, and/or governments to address this constitutional or civic issue. Discuss the impact of the efforts on the United States and/or on American society. In your essay, be sure to develop all aspects of the task. Explain at least 2 efforts to address the issue. Incorporate information from at least 4 documents. Incorporate relevant outside information. Support the theme with relevant facts, examples, and details. Use a logical and clear plan of organization, including an introduction and the conclusions that are beyond a restatement of the theme. Part A. Short answer questions. Document 131. According to Jean H. Baker, what was one historical circumstance that led women to seek the right to vote? Answer. One historical circumstance was the significant legal, political, religious, and cultural discriminations women faced in the 19th century, such as child custody laws favoring fathers, prohibitions against women speaking in public, denial of equal education, and a double standard in societal expectations. Document 2A and 2B 32. Based on these documents, what was one effort made by suffragettes to gain support for women's suffrage? Answer. Suffragettes organized pickets, marches, rallies, and other forms of peaceful protest to gain support for women's suffrage. Document 3A and 3B 33. Based on documents 3A and 3B, state one reason for opposition to the efforts to gain women's suffrage. Answer. One reason was a belief that voting would disrupt women's domestic and maternal roles, causing disharmony in families. Document 434. According to Robert Cooney, what is one impact of the efforts to gain women's suffrage? Answer. The suffrage movement paved the way for women to participate in American political life and attack social problems directly through activism and leadership roles. Document 535. According to Elaine Weiss, what is one impact of the efforts to achieve women's suffrage? Answer. The suffrage movement influenced later American social justice and advocacy movements, such as the Civil Rights Movement, by serving as a model for grassroots organizing, lobbying, and nonviolent protest. Document 6A and 6B 36. Based on documents 6A and 6B, what is one impact of achieving women's suffrage? Answer. Women's suffrage led to increased representation of women in political offices, though women remain underrepresented in leadership positions.